James Whitaker stood silently in the penthouse office on the 42nd floor of Nexus Innovations, gazing down at the bustling streets of Manhattan. The pale dawn was fading along the horizon, casting a golden hue on the skyscrapers, but there was only a cold emptiness within his chest. At 38, James embodied the American success story, a white CEO with neatly combed brown hair, sharp blue eyes, and a perfectly tailored suit. His tech company, Nexus, dominated the artificial intelligence industry, generating billions of dollars and TED Talks viewed by millions. Besides glowing headlines like self-made billionaire and pioneer of the future, his name appeared in Forbes. But this morning, as sunlight filtered through the glass, James felt like nothing more than a ghost. He had grown up in Greenwich, Connecticut, in a vast but chilly estate. His father, Robert Whitaker, was a Wall Street tycoon who believed emotions were the enemy of success. "Emotions make you weak," James often said, his voice as dry as the sound of ledgers closing. His mother, Eleanor, a prominent philanthropist, tried to make up for it with literary books and hurried hugs. Still, she was always preoccupied with charity events, leaving James with nannies and unchecked piano lessons. In that home, love was displayed like a decorative object, beautiful but untouchable. By age 15, James had learned to sit up straight, speak clearly, and never let a tear fall, especially not in front of his father. Now, standing in his office, with a view spanning the city, he was the very image of what his father had wanted: power, control, invulnerability. But the truth was, James felt hollow. His relationships were like business contracts, short-term, efficient, and leaving no trace. His last girlfriend, Lauren, a fashion journalist with a perfect smile, had left 2 years ago. That night, under a torrential downpour, she stood at the door in a soaked trench coat and said, "Loving you is like trying to unlock a door that's sealed shut, James. I'm tired." He had just stood there, arms crossed, replying, "You're being dramatic." But as the elevator doors closed, her words echoed within him, like a song he couldn't stop playing. Today, something felt different. James touched his chest, sensing a dull ache, as if his heart were trying to say something. He brushed it off, blaming the black coffee or the transcontinental flights. On the desk, his phone buzzed with updates from the executive team, reminding him of the investor meeting with Singapore. His smartwatch blinked warning of a packed schedule. But James didn't move. He stared out the window, his eyes settling on the tiny figures below, wondering if they had ever felt like he did. Standing at the top, yet not knowing what they were living for. He thought of Naomi Carter, the housekeeper who had worked for him for over a year. Naomi, a black American woman in her early 30s, always arrived on time, her curly hair neatly tied back and a soft smile on her face. She moved through his apartment like a quiet shadow, wiping down glass tables, folding towels, and leaving behind the faint scent of lemon water. James rarely spoke to her beyond curt phrases like, "Thank you," or "I'll be home late." But sometimes, he would hear her hum a gospel hymn, her voice deep and warm, as if she brought an entirely different world into his cold apartment. He wondered where she came from, but never asked. To James, she was merely part of the background, like the leather chair in his office or the neon lights outside. The pain in his chest returned, sharper this time. James frowned, gripping the edge of the desk. He told himself it was just stress, but his breathing grew heavy. He entered his private bathroom and turned on the hot water, hoping the steam would soothe him. But as the water poured down, the world suddenly tilted. A stabbing pain sliced through his chest, as if someone were squeezing his heart. James slid down, hands clutching the tiled wall, his vision blurring. The sound of the water drowned out his gasping breaths. At that moment, he thought of his father, of all the lessons about invincibility, and realized they were useless now. Suddenly, footsteps pounded toward him. Alarmed but steady voice cut through the fog. "Mr. Whitaker, are you okay?" James struggled to open his eyes and saw Naomi kneeling beside him, her hands trembling, but quickly pressing against his chest. "You're not breathing. Stay with me." She began performing chest compressions, each one firm and steady, her voice unwavering. "The ambulance is on the way. You're going to be okay." James felt the warmth of her hands, but the darkness pulled at him. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. And then, everything went silent. When James awoke, the harsh white light of the hospital stung his eyes. The steady beep of a heart monitor rang in his ears. He lay on a bed, an IV line in his arm, a dull ache lingering in his chest. He turned his head and saw Naomi sitting in a chair, holding a medical journal, her eyes tired but lighting up as he stirred. "You're awake," she said with relief, rising quickly. "Don't move. I'll get the nurse." James tried to speak, but only a hoarse whisper came out. "You saved me." Naomi nodded, her eyes averting his. "I just did what needed to be done." The doctor entered, explaining that James had suffered a heart attack. He said that if Ms. Carter hadn't performed CPR in time, you wouldn't be sitting here. James looked at Naomi, who stood quietly in the corner, her hands clasped tightly. For the first time, he saw her not just as a housekeeper. She was the one who had touched his fragile body and breathed life into him when he was nearly gone. A crack formed in the wall he had built around himself. But along with gratitude, a question crept into his mind. How could a man like him, living in a world of power and privilege, ever begin to understand someone like Naomi, who came from a world he had never known? The stark white light of the hospital stung James Whitaker's eyes, but he couldn't look away from Naomi Carter. She sat in the plastic chair beside his bed, holding a worn medical journal in her hands, her eyes tired, yet glowing as he stirred. The steady beeping of the heart monitor echoed like a reminder that he was still alive. Because of her. You saved me," James whispered, his voice raspy from the breathing tube that had just been removed. Naomi nodded, her gaze shifting away. "I just did what needed to be done," she said, her tone gentle but firm. But James knew. Not everyone could have done what she did. The doctor entered, a middle-aged man with silver-framed glasses, carrying a medical chart. "You had a heart attack," he explained calmly. "There is no permanent damage, but you'll need rest and lifestyle changes. And I have to say, if Ms. Carter hadn't acted so quickly, the outcome would have been very different." James looked at Naomi, who stood quietly in the corner, her hands clasped tightly. He wanted to say something, but the word thank you felt too small for what she had done. She hadn't just saved his life. She had touched his fragile body, seen him at his weakest, and still chose to stay. When the doctor left, Naomi began to rise. She said I'd get the nurse, but James raised his hand, signaling her to wait. "How long have you been here?" he asked. Naomi hesitated. "Since they brought you in." I wanted to make sure you were okay." James frowned. "You didn't have to do that." She gave a faint smile, her eyes tinged with sorrow. "I know, but I couldn't leave you alone." The sincere yet straightforward words fell into the still pond inside James's heart, sending ripples he hadn't felt before. The following days in the hospital blurred into a haze of medications, tests, and restless sleep. James, who used to run global meetings across 3 time zones, now found himself helpless against the slightest chest pain and lingering fatigue. But each morning, Naomi arrived, bringing a thermos of chamomile tea and a paper bag of homemade cornbread. "My grandma used to say food feeds the soul," she'd remark as she set the bag on the table. James looked at her and realized he had never truly noticed her before. Naomi moved with calm, unhurried grace, as though she carried a different rhythm that starkly contrasted the frenzied pace of the world he knew. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the hospital blinds, James asked, "How do you know CPR?" Naomi sat down, turning her teacup in her hands. "I took a first aid course at the community center when I was caring for my mother. She had a heart condition, so I wanted to be ready." She paused, her eyes drifting to a far-off place. "She passed away 5 years ago. I couldn't save her, but I learned how not to give up." James stayed silent, feeling the weight of her words. He wanted to ask more, but part feared that doing so might pull her into his world, a world built on calculations and distance. When discharged, James returned to his penthouse, an expansive space with marble floors and glass walls overlooking the Hudson River. But it had never felt so empty. The doctor had told him to rest and avoid stress, but James didn't know how to relax. Work had always been his only medicine, but now, every email from Nexus tightened his chest. Naomi continued to come by each day to clean and ensure he took his medication and ate on time. She left small notes on the fridge. "Drink water, not just coffee. Take a break. The world won't collapse." Written in ballpoint pen on Post-it notes, those messages became the brightest moments in his day. One evening, James walked into the kitchen and found Naomi warming a pot of black bean soup. The aroma of cumin and paprika filled the space. She was humming a gospel hymn, her voice deep and warm, as if singing for herself. James paused at the doorway, not wanting to interrupt. "What song is that?" he asked when she looked up, slightly startled. Naomi smiled. "A song my grandma taught me from our church in Harlem. It brings me peace." James sat at the kitchen counter, turning a glass of water in his hand. "You mention your grandmother a lot. She must have meant a lot to you." Naomi nodded, stirring the pot. "She was everything. She raised me and my siblings and taught us that love doesn't have to be grand. It just has to be real." James felt a different ache, not in his chest, but somewhere deeper. He had never known that kind of love, unconditional, without agendas. His life had been built on transactions. He gave time, got power, gave money, and gained a reputation. But Naomi, with her soup and hymns, seemed to live by a different law. "Aren't you ever tired?" he asked, his voice low. "Taking care of people, doing all this, and no one takes care of you?" Naomi looked at him, her gaze sharp but tender. "I do get tired, but I believe everything happens for a reason. Maybe I'm here because you needed me." Her words left James speechless. He thought of the curious glances from Nexus staff when Naomi showed up at the hospital, the way they whispered when she brought him food. He knew his world. The sleek boardrooms, elite galas, didn't easily welcome someone like Naomi. Part of him feared that her presence would disrupt the order he had so carefully built. But another part, smaller but growing, hungered to know her more, to understand the world she carried with her. That night, lying in bed, James stared at the ceiling, the city lights flickering through the windows. He thought of Naomi, her hands pressing his chest, her voice calling him back from the dark. For the first time, he felt like he didn't want her to leave. But with that feeling came a painful question. Could a man who had never truly known how to love ever be worthy of the light Naomi carried? And would the world he belonged to, with all its invisible walls and judgments, ever let them come close? James Whitaker's penthouse, once a symbol of control and order, now breathed differently. The glass walls still reflected the city lights, but the space no longer felt cold. Naomi Carter, with her quiet yet warm presence, had changed that. Every morning, she arrived with a thermos of chamomile tea and a plate of cornbread, setting them on the kitchen counter with a soft smile. "Eat. Don't make me remind you," she'd say, joking but firm. James, still recovering from his heart attack, found himself looking forward to those moments, though he hadn't yet dared to admit it. The days following his discharge passed in an unfamiliar rhythm. He, who once negotiated billion-dollar deals from boardrooms, now struggled to take his meds on time and avoid work emails. His doctor warned him that stress is his greatest enemy now. But James didn't know how to live without pressure. With its marble floors and minimalist furniture, the penthouse had once been his fortress. Now it felt like a luxurious cage. Only Naomi, with her post-it notes like, "Take a deep breath. The world still turns," and the hum of gospel hymns brings a sense of life. One afternoon, James entered the living room and found Naomi dusting the bookshelf. She wore a deep blue sweater, her curly hair tied up high, quietly humming a tune he didn't recognize. He paused, curious. "That song," he said. "What does it mean to you?" Naomi turned around, a little shy. "Oh, it's just an old folk song from church. It reminds me of evenings in Harlem when the whole family was together." She paused as if weighing something, then continued. "My mother used to sing it while doing dishes. It made everything feel lighter." James sat on the sofa, turning a glass of water in his hand. "You grew up in Harlem?" Naomi nodded, her eyes brightening. "Yeah, it is a loud neighborhood, but full of heart. People looked out for each other, even when they didn't have much." James listened, realizing how little he knew about her. He once considered Naomi as just another part of the backdrop, like the chandelier or the espresso machine. But now, she felt like a book whose pages he wanted to read. "Did you ever want to do something else?" he asked. "I mean, besides this job?" Naomi stopped dusting, her eyes distant. "I used to dream of becoming a nurse. I like caring for people and helping them through hard days. But after my mom passed, I had to take care of my younger siblings. That dream had to wait." She smiled a bit sadly. "Maybe one day." Her words touched a part of James he had always kept locked. He thought of his father, who taught him that dreams were luxuries reserved for the weak who couldn't win. But Naomi, though surrounded by hardship, still held on to hope. "Don't you regret it?" he asked. "Giving up so much?" Naomi looked at him, her eyes sharp but kind. "Regret doesn't change anything. I did what I had to do, and things will work out." At that moment, James felt a crack in the wall he had built around himself. He wanted to say something, but a silent fear held him back. He was James Whitaker, the man who ran a tech empire, who never needed anyone. But Naomi, with her quiet sincerity, made him question whether he'd been living all wrong. At the same time, he recognized another barrier. His world, of upscale galas and powerful boardrooms, was not a world Naomi belonged to. Could he invite her in? And would she even want to be? James called out one evening as Naomi was getting ready to leave. "Naomi, wait." She turned, bag on her shoulder. "Thank you," he said, his voice low, "for saving me, but for being here." Naomi smiled, but her eyes were searching. "You don't have to say that. I'm just doing my job." James shook his head. "No, you're doing more than that. You've made this place different." Naomi hesitated, as if about to say something, but only nodded. "Rest up, James. I'll be back in the morning." James stood alone in the apartment as the door clicked shut, the city lights blinking beyond the glass. He thought of Naomi's smile, of the stories she had shared, and realized he wanted to know more, not just about her, but about himself. But a voice in his head cautioned him. He and Naomi came from two different worlds. The curious glances from Nexus staff when she had shown up at the hospital and the hushed hallway whispers about the maid still lingered. He had once ignored them, but now they resurfaced as a pressing question. Did he have the courage to cross that invisible line? That night, James couldn't sleep. He stepped onto the balcony, the cold wind brushing against his face. He thought of his mother, the one who had once said that love was the only thing worth risking for. But he had lived his whole life without risk, without opening up. Naomi was melting the ice around him with her songs and post-it notes. But along with that warmth came a fear. If he let her in, would he lose the control he'd spent his life building? And if he didn't, would he miss the one thing that had ever made him feel truly alive? James Whitaker's penthouse, with its glass walls and marble floors, was no longer the lonely fortress it once had been. Every day, Naomi Carter brought a new rhythm to the space, the faint scent of chamomile tea in the air, the soft hum of her voice as she cleaned, and post-it notes on the fridge with messages like, "Try smiling today. It's free." Though still recovering from his heart attack, James found himself waiting for these moments. They were small, but like pebbles tossed into still water. They sent ripples through something long dormant inside him. Naomi didn't just care for James's health, reminding him to take his medication, cooking light meals like black bean soup or cornbread. She quietly pulled him out of the darkness he'd built around himself. One morning, as sunlight filtered through the windows, James saw her sitting at the kitchen counter, reading an old medical book. "Are you still thinking about becoming a nurse?" he asked, taking a seat across from her. Naomi nodded, flipping a page. "I like reading about it. It makes me feel closer to the dream, even if it's just on paper." James watched her, recognizing the patience in her voice, a patience he had never known. "You could go back to school," he said. "I could help." Naomi looked up, her gaze sharp but uncertain. "James, I know you mean well, but I don't want to feel like I'm taking advantage. I've been taking care of myself for a long time." Her words, though gentle, carried a weight that left James silent. He wanted to tell her it wasn't charity, that he just wanted to see her get what she deserved. But he knew she had a dignity of her own, something he rarely thought about in his world, where most things could be bought. In the days that followed, they began sharing more through ordinary moments. One afternoon, Naomi brought a plate of roasted peanuts, a snack she called soul medicine from her family gatherings. James found himself laughing freely for the first time in years as she told him about her mischievous younger brother, who once burned the kitchen trying to roast peanuts. "What's he up to now?" James asked, picking up a peanut. Naomi smiled, though her eyes clouded briefly. "He's doing well, but we don't see each other much. I'm busy working, and he's got his own life." James heard the loneliness in her voice, something he knew all too well, and he wanted to ease it for the first time, even just a little. One evening, as Naomi was preparing to leave, James invited her to stay for dinner. He said quickly, "Not as part of your job, afraid she'd misunderstand. Just as a company, as a friend." Naomi hesitated but eventually nodded. They sat at the dining table, the light from the chandelier falling gently on the roasted chicken and mashed sweet potatoes Naomi had made. James, so used to eating alone in front of his laptop, found the setting unfamiliar but warm. "Who taught you to cook?" he asked, cutting into the chicken. Naomi chuckled. "My grandmother. She used to say cooking is a way of storytelling. Every dish has a memory." She pointed at the sweet potatoes. "This one's from Thanksgiving dinners. The whole family would gather. even if we didn't have much. James listened, drawn in by how she spoke and turned ordinary things into something meaningful. He told her about the one time he'd tried to cook, a disastrous attempt at burnt pasta, and they both laughed, the sound echoing in the usually silent apartment. But as Naomi talked about holidays in Harlem, songs, laughter, cramped apartments, James felt a distance. His world, lavish parties, conversations about stocks and contracts, was far removed from hers. He wondered if he could ever enter her world, or if she would ever want to join his. His inner conflict deepened when he began noticing the looks of others. One day, when Naomi brought food to his office at Nexus to ensure he didn't skip lunch, his assistant Clara eyed her with curiosity and suspicion. "She's around more than I expected," Clara said, half joking, half not. James brushed it off, but the words stayed with him. He knew the whispers were beginning. About the maid always by the CEO's side. About the gulf between them. Part of him wanted to ignore it, but another feared those whispers might hurt Naomi. Another evening, as they sat on the sofa with cups of tea, James asked, "Do you ever feel out of place, like you don't belong?" Naomi looked at him, her eyes cautious. "What do you mean?" James hesitated. "Here, in my world, it's different from what you know." Naomi set her cup down, her voice steady. "I'm used to not belonging, James. When you do the kind of work I do, you learn to walk past the looks and the comments. But I'm here because I choose to be, not because I need to belong." Her honest, not bitter words made James ashamed for ever questioning her strength. That night, after Naomi left, James stood by the window, watching the traffic below. He thought about how she told stories, gave value to the most minor things, and faced the world without armor. He wanted to be closer to her. But the fear still lingered. Fear that he wasn't good enough to understand her, that his world would eventually push her away. And yet, for the first time, the desire to be part of Naomi's story burned brighter than the fear. A question hung heavy inside him. Would he dare cross the boundary he had lived behind his whole life? Or would he let fear win again? The chandelier light in James Whitaker's penthouse cast a soft glow over the dining table, where he and Naomi Carter sat across from each other, surrounded by plates of cornbread and a steaming pot of chamomile tea. These dinners had become a familiar rhythm in recent weeks. Not work-related, but moments of shared stories, laughter, and glances filled with unsaid meaning. But tonight, as Naomi recalled a childhood memory, how she and her brother once climbed onto the roof to watch 4th of July fireworks, James felt something shift. He wasn't just listening. He wanted to be a part of her world, even if only through her stories. "Your brother sounds interesting," James said, smiling as he sipped his tea. Naomi nodded, her eyes lighting up. "He is. He works at an auto shop now, but still dreams of becoming a musician. I always tell him to try at least once." James looked at her, hearing the quiet sacrifice in her voice, how she had set aside her dream of becoming a nurse to care for him, yet still encouraged him to pursue his. "You should try too," he said, more serious now. "Nursing school. I can help, not because I think you need it, but because I believe you deserve it." Naomi set down her spoon, hesitation flickering in her eyes. "James, I've told you. I don't want to feel like I owe you. I know you mean well, but I must do this." James nodded, respecting her resolve, though a quiet frustration rose in him. He wanted to help, but for the first time, he realized helping wasn't just writing a check. It required understanding, something he was still learning from Naomi. Their relationship, though undefined, was growing through these small, everyday moments. One evening, Naomi brought over an old novel she loved. Another, James attempted to bake cookies using her grandmother's recipe and burned the entire batch. They laughed and teased each other, and the penthouse no longer felt cold or distant in those moments. But James knew the world outside this apartment was not as simple as their dinners. One afternoon, James invited Naomi to a charity gala hosted by Nexus Innovations, an elegant event at the Waldorf Astoria. "I want you there. Not as staff. As someone important to me," he said, his voice hesitant. Naomi smiled, but concern lingered in her eyes. "I have nothing to wear to a place like that, James." He waved it off. "You don't need anything fancy. Just be you." She eventually agreed, and when she stepped into the living room wearing a simple but elegant blue dress, her curls gently framing her face, James felt his heart skip. "You look beautiful," he said softly. Naomi blushed, though her eyes remained wary. "Thanks. But I know places like this weren't made for people like me." At the event, crystal chandeliers sparkled, and violins filled the air. James introduced Naomi to colleagues, calling her the woman who saved my life. But he noticed the curious stares and strained smiles. An investor, Mr. Harrison, pulled James aside and asked, half-jokingly, "So who is she, Whitaker? The housekeeper? Or something more?" James gripped his glass tighter, keeping his composure. "She's someone important to me," he replied firmly. Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Be careful. Reputations like yours aren't easy to build." The words stung like a knife, and James realized that his world, with all its unspoken rules and hidden prejudices, was watching them. Naomi, though she kept smiling, felt the tension. She stood beside James and answered questions politely, but her eyes caught the judgmental glances from a nearby group of women. Later, she turned to him in the car, her voice low. "I know those looks, James. They weren't just curious. They were judging." James tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "They don't matter, Naomi." She shook her head. "They matter to you, to your company. I don't want to make things more complicated for you." James pulled the car over, looking at her directly. "You're not making things more complicated. You make me better." When they returned to the penthouse, the air felt heavier than usual. Naomi walked into the kitchen and started washing glasses out of habit, but James gently took her hand and led her away. "Don't work tonight," he said. "Stay here with me." They sat on the sofa, the balcony lights spilling in, and Naomi finally spoke. "I'm no stranger to being seen as an outsider, James. But in your world, it's different. It scares me. Not for me, but because I don't want you to choose between me and everything you've built." James looked at her, his chest tightening. "I don't want to choose. I want both. I want you." His words, sincere but risky, hung in the air between them. Naomi didn't answer immediately, but held his hand, her fingers interlocking. "If we keep going, James, it won't be easy. Are you ready for that?" He nodded, even as he knew her question wasn't just about feelings, but the invisible barriers ahead. That night, after Naomi left, James stood by the window, looking at the city. He thought about her smile, her courage in the face of judgment, and his fear, not of losing his reputation, but of not being strong enough to protect the one thing that was beginning to matter more than anything else. The warm glow of the streetlights filtered through the penthouse windows, casting a golden hue across the marble floors. James Whitaker and Naomi Carter sat on the sofa, 2 cups of chamomile tea growing cold on the table. Over the past few weeks, they had broken through the initial walls, sharing simple dinners and long conversations about dreams, memories, and hidden fears. But after the charity gala, with its judgmental stares and unspoken assumptions, a new tension had settled between them. not born of distance, but of the weight of what they were building. Naomi recalled another memory tonight, a summer picnic in Harlem Park, where she and her brother flew kites made from plastic bags and wooden sticks. They didn't fly high, but we felt like we'd touched the clouds, she said, her smile lighting up her face. James listened, mesmerized by the way she made simple things feel sacred. He wanted to share something of his own, but his memories, European vacations and lavish galas, felt cold beside hers. "I've never flown a kite," he admitted quietly. Naomi raised an eyebrow, half teasing. "Seriously? We've got to fix that. I'll make one, but you have to promise not to tangle it." Their laughter echoed softly, but James felt a more profound impulse stirring. He wanted to say something, not just thank you or small talk. He wanted her to know how she had changed him. "Naomi," he began, voice uncertain, "have you ever thought that someone could completely change because of another person?" She looked at him, eyes searching. "What do you mean?" James took a breath, gripping the edge of the sofa. "Before I met you, I didn't think I needed anyone. I lived for control, for winning. But you've made me want to be someone different, someone better." Silence settled between them, broken only by the muffled sounds of city traffic below. Naomi set her cup down, her gaze soft but cautious. "James, what are you saying?" He looked at her directly, his heart pounding as if he were facing the Nexus board. Not with a pitch, but with the most truth he'd ever spoken. "I'm saying, I'm in love with you, Naomi," he said, voice trembling but sure. "You didn't just save my life. You saved me." The confession hung in the air, delicate as silk. Naomi blinked, lips parted, but she didn't speak right away. James felt his chest tighten, fearing he'd gone too far. But then she smiled, a tearful, radiant smile, her eyes shimmering. "James," she whispered, "you're not the only one who feels that way. I love you too." But her smile faded, replaced by a look of quiet worry. "But you know this love. It won't be simple. Your world, our worlds, they don't blend easily." James took her hand, their fingers interlacing, the warmth of her skin grounding him. He said, "I don't care what they think," though deep down, he knew it wasn't entirely true. The curious glances at the gala, Harrison's warning about reputation, they still haunted him. But looking into Naomi's eyes, he felt a strength that made him want to face it all. He leaned in, and they kissed. A slow, tender kiss that carried the weight of black bean soup, laughter in the kitchen, and handwritten post-it notes. It wasn't a kiss of impulsive passion, but a quiet promise. Naomi rested her forehead against his when they parted, her breath unsteady. "Are you sure, James? About this? About us?" He nodded, even though part of him still trembled. Not from doubt in their love, but from all he would have to learn to be worthy of it. "I've never been more sure," he whispered. Naomi smiled, though her tone was serious. "If we're going to do this, we have to be honest, not just with each other, but with ourselves. You must understand my world as I'm trying to understand yours." Her words were both a challenge and an invitation. James thought of her stories, of Harlem, family, Thanksgiving dinners with mashed sweet potatoes, and church songs. He wanted to know more, not just to understand her, but to understand himself. But he also knew that stepping into her world meant confronting prejudices he had once ignored. One morning, when Naomi brought over a plate of coconut cookies, my grandma's favorite, he asked, "Would you want me to meet your brother? Or your family?" Naomi hesitated. "I'd like that. But he doesn't trust easily. He'll probably think you're another rich guy looking for a distraction. The comment stung, but James didn't blame her. He knew his world, of sleek boardrooms and high society, often inspired suspicion. "I'll prove I'm serious," he said. Naomi nodded, her eyes a mixture of hope and fear. "I believe you want to. But it will take time, James, for both of us." That night, after Naomi left, James stood by the window, staring at the city glittering with lights. He thought about the kiss, the confession, and the challenge Naomi had laid before him. He wanted to be the man she needed, not just a CEO with power and wealth, but someone who could enter her world with humility and truth. But one question remained, echoing in his heart. Would he have the courage to face the stares, the whispers, and the parts of himself still afraid of change? He knew that answer, more than any speech or business deal, would define their love and the man he was becoming. James Whitaker's penthouse, with the city lights shimmering beyond the glass windows, had become a refuge for the precious moments he shared with Naomi Carter. After their quiet confession under the golden glow of evening light, they began to step into a relationship that was still fragile, but no less real. Evenings were spent cooking together, Naomi teaching James how to make spicy roasted peanuts, laughing as he spilled seasoning across the counter, or sitting on the sofa, sharing books and songs that stirred old memories. But beneath the laughter and hand-holding, both could feel the weight of the unspoken, especially Naomi's past. One afternoon, with golden autumn sunlight spilling across the kitchen, Naomi brought over a plate of coconut cakes, a recipe she called a reminder of happy days from her grandmother. James, attempting to slice the cake, asked, "Your grandmother must have been special. You mention her a lot." Naomi smiled, but her gaze drifted somewhere far away. "She was. She raised me and taught me to stand tall despite hard times. But I haven't always made her proud." She paused, fingers circling her cup of chamomile tea, searching for the right words. James set the knife down, sensing the shift in her voice. "Do you want to tell me?" he asked gently. Naomi took a deep breath, her eyes meeting his before turning toward the window. "When I was younger, I got very sick, a blood disorder. The doctors said I was lucky to survive, but afterward, they warned me I might never be able to have children." She stopped, her voice trembling. "I was devastated. I have always dreamed of having a family and being a mother. But I had to learn to accept that dream might never come true." James stayed silent, absorbing the pain woven into her every word. He wanted to take her hand, but waited, letting her lead. "Naomi said I haven't told many people," her voice lower now. "Even my brother, Jamal, only knows part of it. I feared that people would see me as broken if they knew." She looked at James, her eyes strong but vulnerable. "I'm telling you this because if we're serious, if this is real, you need to know all of me, even the parts that aren't perfect." James felt his chest tighten. He stood, stepped closer, and gently took her hand. "Naomi, I love you for who you are, not for what you can or can't do. You're not broken. You are everything I need." His steady and sincere words made Naomi blink, a single tear tracing her cheek. She squeezed his hand, though worry lingered in her voice. "I believe you, James. I do. But I'm scared. Scared that one day you'll want something I can't give. Or worse, your world will make me feel like I'm not enough." James pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "My world doesn't matter as much as you do. We'll face everything, together." But deep inside, a quiet question echoed. Did he truly understand what she had endured? In the following days, they continued to build their relationship with care. James began stepping into Naomi's world, if only in small ways. One evening, she invited him to help make cornbread from her family's recipe, and they burst into laughter when he accidentally covered the kitchen in flour. "You're a disaster in the kitchen," Naomi teased, wiping flour from his cheek. But those moments of joy couldn't shield them from the challenges beyond the penthouse walls. One day, James received an email from a board member, subtly suggesting that Naomi's presence at company events was becoming a distraction. James deleted it immediately, but the words left a mark. The real conflict arrived when Naomi received a call from her brother, Jamal. She sat on the balcony, the phone pressed to her ear, and her voice was tense. When she returned inside, James asked, "Is everything okay?" Naomi shook her head. "Jamal found out about us. He thinks I'm fooling myself. He says you're just another rich guy looking for some new thrill. He told me to be careful. People like you never stick around." James felt a flash of anger but kept it in check. "Is that what you think?" he asked, voice low. Naomi met his gaze, pain in her eyes. "No, I believe you. But Jamal, he's just trying to protect me. He's seen me break before." James sat beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "How do I prove it to him? To you?" Naomi gave a faint smile. "Just be who you are, James. But you must understand, my world isn't just cozy dinners and laughter. It's got scars, people who doubt, and days when I struggle to feel enough." James nodded, feeling the gravity in her words. He wanted to say he'd fight for her, but he knew that words alone weren't enough. He had to show it. That night, as Naomi slept on the living room couch, James stood by the window, looking at the glowing city below. He thought about her past, the illness, the fear, the resilience it took to live. He thought about the judgmental stares at the gala, the board member's email, and Jamal's warning. Their love, as beautiful as it was being tested by invisible wounds, hers and his own. But for the first time, James didn't want to run. He wanted to face it, not just for Naomi, but for himself. The question still hung in the air. Could he overcome these barriers, not just to love her, but to understand her truly? Autumn light streamed through the windows of James Whitaker's penthouse, casting a soft golden glow across the kitchen counter, where Naomi Carter stood slicing vegetables for black bean soup. In the weeks since their confession and sharing of past wounds, their relationship had deepened, though invisible barriers still lingered. They found joy in life's quiet moments. James learning to fold cornbread batter, using Naomi's grandmother's recipe, usually ending up with dough-covered hands, and Naomi laughing uncontrollably whenever he missang the lyrics to a gospel song she'd taught him. But beneath the laughter, they both understood that their love was being tested, not only by societal judgment, but also by the private fears they each carried. Recently, Naomi had begun to feel different. She was more tired than usual, often dizzy, and a strange tension in her body made her uneasy. She blamed the long work hours, or perhaps the stress from her brother Jamal, who still questioned her relationship with James. But one morning, when she nearly collapsed in the kitchen from a wave of dizziness, she knew she had to find out. In the bathroom, she took out a pregnancy test James had once picked up during a casual grocery run, just in case, he'd said with a teasing smile. Her hands trembled as she held the test, her heart pounding like it might burst from her chest. The waiting minutes felt like a lifetime. When the two pink lines appeared, Naomi froze, her hand covering her mouth. Pregnant. The word didn't feel real, especially after what doctors had once told her about her blood condition, that pregnancy might not be possible. She sank to the floor, tears spilling down, not from sadness, but from a mix of hope, fear, and disbelief. She took 2 more tests, and all gave the same result. She was pregnant, but the joy quickly blurred under the weight of worry. She had once been warned. If she ever did conceive, her body might not survive the strain. Given her medical history, everything about this was a risk. That evening, James returned home to find Naomi on the sofa, clutching a pillow, her eyes distant. "Naomi?" he asked, voice tinged with concern. She looked up, her eyes bright but strained. "James, I need to tell you something." He sat beside her, his hand touching her shoulder. "Is everything okay?" Naomi took a breath, then handed him the test. James looked at it, stunned, then looked at her, a flood of questions in his eyes. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, voice trembling. "I don't know how, but it's real." James sank to his knees before her, gripping her hands, a smile spreading across his face, though it quickly mixed with concern when he saw her tears. "Naomi, this is a miracle," he said, his voice thick. "But are you okay? How do you feel?" Naomi shook her head, voice breaking. "I'm happy, James, but I'm scared. The doctors once said my body was too weak, that pregnancy could be dangerous. I don't know if I can do this." James held her tightly, his arms wrapped around her warmth. "You're not alone. We'll do this together. I promise." The next day, they visited the clinic. In the ultrasound room's dim light, the monitor's soft glow cast shadows across their tense faces. The doctor, a woman with a calming voice, moved the probe gently, then paused, her brows rising. "There's something I need to show you," she said, turning the screen toward them. James and Naomi stared intently, hearts racing. "There's not just one heartbeat," the doctor said, smiling. "There are 3. You're having triplets." Time stood still. Naomi gripped James's hand so tightly he winced, her eyes wide with shock. "3?" she whispered, voice cracking. James, jaw dropped, turned to the doctor. "Do you mean triplets?" The doctor nodded. "That's right. 3 babies. All are developing well. But I must warn you, triplet pregnancies carry significant risk, especially given Ms. Carter's medical history. We'll need close monitoring." James's mind spun. He looked at Naomi. She was crying now, her smile a fragile blend of joy and fear. 3 babies, he repeated, voice trembling. Then he laughed, a startled, emotional sound filled with disbelief and wonder. They left the clinic hand in hand, dazed, walking like a dream. In the car, Naomi leaned her head on James's shoulder and whispered, "I don't know how this happened, James. I thought I couldn't. And now, 3. James kissed her forehead, feeling her warmth. "You're my miracle, Naomi. You always have been." But as he drove them home, a new worry crept into his mind. Triplets were not just a blessing. They were a massive responsibility fraught with medical risk, pressure, and the eyes of a world still waiting to judge. He thought of Jamal's warning, the stares at the gala, the quiet scrutiny of the world around them. Could he protect the family they were about to build? That night, lying in bed, the city lights flickering outside the window, Naomi placed her hand gently over her stomach. "I'm scared, James," she whispered. "Scared I'm not strong enough. Scared the world will be too cruel to our children." James turned to her, his hand cupping her cheek. "We'll do everything to protect them. I'll be here, every step." But inside, a question gnawed at him. Was their love, fierce as it was, enough to carry them through the trials ahead? Through Naomi's health, the triplets' safety, and the eyes still waiting to tear them apart? He didn't have the answer yet, but he knew one thing. He would fight to find it. James Whitaker's penthouse, once a symbol of isolation, was now filled with signs of a new life. Parenting books lined the shelves next to baby blue blankets Naomi Carter had chosen for the nursery. The news of Naomi's triplet pregnancy had turned initial joy into a journey of anxious hope. Each day, James and Naomi tried to build a future for their growing family, but waves of health concerns, societal pressures, and outside doubts continued to test their bond. Radiant with the glow of an expectant mother, Naomi was now confronting increasingly difficult days. She was often exhausted, plagued by back pain and nausea that forced her to pause even while making her beloved black bean soup. Her doctor required close monitoring, warning that a triplet pregnancy could place immense strain on her body, especially given her medical history. One morning, as she sat on the sofa, gently rubbing her belly, James noticed her wince from a sharp contraction. He dropped to his knees beside her, alarmed. "Are you okay? Do we need to go to the hospital?" Naomi gave him a faint smile and squeezed his hand. "It's normal, James, but I'm scared. Scared I won't be strong enough." Her words left James feeling helpless. He, who once negotiated billion-dollar deals, couldn't shield Naomi from the risks inside her body. He began reading obsessively about triplet pregnancies, diet plans, and warning signs, and compiled notes. Despite her objections, he also arranged for Naomi to reduce her work hours. "I don't want to sit around, James," she said firmly. "I need to feel like I'm still me." James nodded, though deep down, he was determined to do everything possible to keep her safe. They began preparing for the babies with care and quiet joy. One afternoon, they sat on the living room floor, flipping through name lists. Naomi suggested Isaiah for a boy, inspired by a gospel hymn she loved. James chose Grace for a girl, saying she would carry her mother's gentleness. They laughed, debating the third name, and finally settled on Noah. "Because he'll be the explorer," Naomi teased. They painted the nursery in soft blue and yellow, and James, though clumsy, insisted on painting one wall himself, splattering paint on his shirt and making Naomi laugh out loud. These small moments became their lifeline, brief escapes from fear. But outside pressure crept in again. One day, James received a call from Elaine, a Nexus board member. She was blunt. "Your distractions are making investors nervous," she said. "You're the face of this company, Whitaker. They want to see you in the boardroom, not busy with family drama." James kept his anger in check, assuring her he managed things well. But her words hit deep. His relationship and growing family were being perceived as weaknesses in the world he came from. Personal tensions also surfaced. One evening, Naomi received a message from Jamal, her younger brother, asking to meet. She invited him to the penthouse, and though nervous, James agreed to stay for the conversation. Jamal arrived, his gaze cautious as he surveyed the unfamiliar luxury of the apartment. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, the tension in his voice. "He's your boss. If this falls apart, what happens to you?" Naomi squeezed James's hand beneath the table and replied steadily, "Jamal, I trust James. He's not just my boss. He's the man I love." Jamal turned to James, his eyes sharp with skepticism. "Do you know what she's been through? If you hurt her, I won't forgive you." James nodded solemnly. "I won't hurt her. I promise." The meeting left a quiet bruise on Naomi's heart. That night, lying in bed, she leaned into James's shoulder and whispered, "I know Jamal wants to protect me, but I hate that we have to prove our love." James kissed the top of her head, but inside, a new fear stirred. Could he shield Naomi not just from her brother's doubts, but from the judgment of the world he belonged to? Joy and anxiety wove together in the days that followed. One evening, Naomi taught James a lullaby from Harlem, her voice soft as prayer. James, off-key and unsure, felt something in him settle. But when she went to bed, he stayed in the living room, staring at the parenting books on the table. He thought about Naomi's health, the doctor's warnings, Jamal's glare, and Elaine's coldness. Their fierce and genuine love was being tested by waves that wouldn't stop. And James asked himself, could he truly keep his promise to Naomi? Not just as her partner, but as a father, an anchor, a steady hand in the storm? The answer, he knew, would be revealed not in words, but in the days ahead, when they would face, together, whatever fate had in store. The gentle spring sunlight filtered through the curtains of James Whitaker's penthouse, casting a soft golden glow on the folded baby blankets in the corner, ready for the 3 little lives about to arrive. Over the past months, James and Naomi Carter had weathered both joy and fear through the challenges of a high-risk triplet pregnancy. From Naomi's aching back to the skeptical glances of Nexus board members. They had chosen names, Isaiah, Grace, and Noah, and practiced lullabies. But every day felt like a tightrope walk, with Naomi's health stretched thin. Today, everything would change forever. Naomi woke before dawn, sensing an unfamiliar stillness in her body. The babies had been active every morning in recent weeks, but today, they seemed to be waiting. She placed a hand over her belly, then gasped as a sharp contraction rippled through her. She breathed slowly, as she had in more challenging times before, but she knew when the second contraction came, more intense. "James," she whispered, gently shaking him awake. He opened his eyes, instantly alert when he saw her expression. "It's time," she said, her voice trembling but firm. James shot out of bed, heart pounding, grabbing the hospital bag they'd packed weeks ago. He called the hospital and helped Naomi down to the car. He gripped her hand tightly on the way, trying to keep his voice calm through every contraction. "You're doing great," he kept repeating, though inside him was a storm of fear. Naomi clenched his hand, eyes closed. "I'm scared, James," she whispered. "If anything happens..." He kissed the back of her hand, voice steady, though his chest ached. "Nothing will happen. We're going to meet them today, Naomi. Together." The delivery room was a world of soft light and rhythmic machines. Nurses moved quickly, their voices calm but urgent. Naomi, dressed in a hospital gown, lay on the bed, her hair tied back, face a portrait of resilience and fragility. James stood beside her in surgical scrubs, eyes never leaving hers. He touched her forehead, whispering words he didn't even know he had. "You're the strongest person I know. I'm here, every second." Naomi nodded, squeezing his hand like it was her lifeline through the pain. Hours passed. Each contraction was a mountain. Naomi clenched her teeth, focusing on every breath, but exhaustion showed in every muscle. James felt helpless, unable to stop the pain, only able to hold her hand, wipe her brow, and pray silently. He thought of the past months, the nights she taught him lullabies, their laughter choosing baby names, the fear that once haunted him of losing her. "You've got this, Naomi," he whispered hoarsely. "We're so close now." Finally, the doctor gave a signal. It was time. With a strength James had never seen before, Naomi pushed with everything she had. A piercing cry shattered the tension, sharp and beautiful. "The first boy!" the doctor called, lifting a red, squirming Isaiah. James laughed through tears, but stayed focused on Naomi. Minutes later, another cry. Grace, small but fierce. Then Noah, whose more resounding cry completed the chorus of life. Naomi collapsed into the pillow, sobbing with relief. James leaned down, forehead against hers, crying freely. "They're here, Naomi. You did it! In recovery, Naomi cradled Grace, while James held Isaiah and Noah, each baby wrapped in soft blue blankets. He looked down at them, the tiny fists, the blinking eyes, and felt a love so intense it almost hurt. He whispered to Naomi, "I don't know how to be a father." She smiled, voice weak, but warm. "You're already doing it, James." He kissed Isaiah's forehead, then looked at her. "I swear, I won't let anything take this away." But in his heart, a quiet fear lingered. Naomi was exhausted, and doctors warned she'd need a long recovery. Could he protect this fragile miracle from everything waiting outside? Naomi took his hand in their hospital room, her eyes glowing through the fatigue. "We did it, didn't we?" she asked. James nodded, but his thoughts drifted. Jamal's doubt, Nexus's looming judgment, a world eager to pass a verdict. Their love had birthed 3 miracles, but he knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. That night, while Naomi slept, James sat beside the bassinets, watching the rise and fall of 3 tiny chests. He thought of the lullaby Naomi once taught him, of the strength she showed today, and asked himself, would he have the courage to face what's next, not just for their children, but for the woman who had changed his life forever? James Whitaker's penthouse no longer felt like a cold sanctuary of glass and marble. 3 years after Isaiah, Grace, and Noah were born, it had transformed into a vibrant home, filled with children's laughter, toys scattered across the floor, and crayon drawings taped proudly to the refrigerator. Naomi Carter, now a licensed nurse, brought the warmth of Harlem lullabies into the space, while James, once a work-obsessed CEO, had learned how to change diapers and sing lullabies out of tune. Their family life, chaotic and tender, was living proof that love could defy the odds. Those early parenting days were a whirlwind of diapers, bottles, and sleepless nights. Naomi, though recovered from the harrowing triplet birth, still battled waves of exhaustion. Fueled by a newfound devotion, James stayed up late comforting Isaiah or preparing bottles for Grace and Noah with the precision of an engineer. "You're such a clumsy dad," Naomi teased when he spilled milk on his shirt, but her eyes sparkled with pride. They learned to share the burden, from pediatrician visits to the simple joy of watching all 3 kids giggle in a tub of bubbles. But family life wasn't all joy. Though deeply fulfilled as a mother, Naomi often felt torn between home and her dream of becoming a nurse. With James's support, she returned to school and completed her training. On her graduation day, she stood on stage in her white uniform, eyes shining as James and the children clapped from the audience. "You did it, Naomi," he whispered, embracing her after the ceremony. "No," she said, gripping his hand. "We did it." Still, she worried about how her new job would demand time away from her children. James faced battles of his own. The Nexus board continued to pressure him, claiming he had lost focus because of his family. At one meeting, Elaine, a senior board member, criticized him openly. "You used to be a leader, Whitaker. Now you spend too much time on personal matters." Though angered, James responded with quiet conviction. "Family doesn't make me weaker," he said. "It makes me stronger." His words were not just defiance, but the beginning of a personal revolution. He began reforming Nexus from within, introducing 6-month parental leave, on-site childcare support, and mental health programs inspired by his journey with Naomi. The public took notice. At a press conference held at Nexus headquarters, James stood before reporters. No script, no suit, just a button-down shirt with an open collar. 3 years ago, I thought success was numbers and power, he said, voice clear. Then, I nearly lost everything. What saved me wasn't luck, a woman who saw what I couldn't. My worth. She didn't just save my life. She gave me 3 reasons to live. He paused, eyes glistening. Today, I'm announcing new family support policies for every Nexus employee. No one should choose between their job and the people they love. Applause rang out, but the real moment came afterward. Naomi stood backstage, holding Grace in her arms, smiling at James as he stepped down. "You're changing the world," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. James shook his head and kissed her forehead. "No, you changed me. I'm just following your lead." But he knew not everyone supported the reforms. Some investors pulled out, calling the policies luxuries. A few editorials mocked him as an overly sentimental CEO. Still, James stood firm. He had found a purpose greater than prestige. Social tension lingered. Jamal, Naomi's brother, though slowly accepting James, remained distant. One day, he visited with a gift: 3 plush animals for the kids. "I still don't fully trust you," he said to James, his tone stiff. "But my sister is happy." James nodded. "I'll keep proving it, Jamal." Naomi watched the exchange, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. But she knew healing would take time. Their home was messy, noisy, and filled with love. One afternoon, Naomi taught the children a Harlem folk song, her voice gentle as a lullaby. James sat cross-legged on the floor with a pile of building blocks, singing off-key while the kids laughed. But when night fell and the children slept, Naomi leaned into James's shoulder, voice soft. "Some days, I'm afraid we won't do it right. I want to be a great mom, a good nurse, and what you need." James wrapped his arms around her and whispered, "You already are. We don't have to be perfect, just together." That night, James stood in the nursery, gazing at the 3 cribs. He thought of Naomi, her strength in the delivery room, perseverance through school, and unwavering love. He thought of Nexus, the new policies slowly reshaping lives, and a world still skeptical of them. Their passion had built a family and sparked a mission. But he wondered, could he continue to protect what they had built as corporate and societal pressures mounted? He knew the answer would be shaped not by declarations, but by the steps they would take, side by side. Summer cast a golden light over James Whitaker's penthouse, filled with warmth and life. 5 years had passed since Isaiah, Grace, and Noah were born, and the once cold fortress of glass and marble had transformed into a living home, one echoing with laughter, scattered toys, and the faint aroma of cornbread wafting from the kitchen. Naomi Carter, now a devoted nurse, brought the soul of Harlem folk songs into their days, while James, once a man who lived for power, now found joy in stacking wooden blocks with his children. Their imperfect yet whole life stood as a testament to a love that had weathered storms of illness, judgment, and doubt. One afternoon, the backyard buzzed with a small gathering, not for Nexus investors or corporate partners, but for neighbors, friends, and Naomi's fellow nurses. Isaiah dashed around with a homemade kite. Grace tugged at Naomi's dress, begging for a story, and Noah, ever mischievous, chased a beetle through the grass. James, sleeves rolled up, stood at the grill, clumsily flipping chicken. In a pale yellow dress, Naomi brought out a tray of homemade lemonade, her eyes glowing as she took in the scene. "You'd better focus," she teased, laughing, "unless you want to burn the chicken like last time." Laughter rippled through the yard. The celebration marked milestones. Naomi had completed her first year as a licensed nurse, and James had just received a community award for Nexus's groundbreaking family support policies. These policies, 6-month parental leave, childcare assistance, and mental health resources, had transformed the lives of hundreds of employees, though not without backlash. Some investors had pulled out, and a few headlines still labeled James a CEO who lost his edge. But he didn't care. "I used to think legacy was about numbers," he told Naomi the night before the party. "Now I know. It's what we leave behind in people's hearts." Jamal, Naomi's brother, arrived too, carrying a guitar. After years of guarded skepticism, he had slowly accepted James, especially after seeing him play and laugh with the kids. "You're not so bad, Whitaker," Jamal said, giving James a rare nod. Naomi, standing nearby, smiled softly, feeling a part of the past finally heal. She remembered fearing that Jamal would never understand, fearing that James's world would always push hers away. But now, as she watched her brother sing a Harlem folk song for the children, she knew they were finding their way back to each other. As the sun dipped low, James stood beneath a flower-draped arch in the garden, Grace perched on his shoulders, holding a glass of lemonade. "I used to think life was a war to conquer," he said to the small crowd, his voice steady and warm. "I was wrong. Love isn't a distraction. It's the reason we keep going. This woman," he looked at Naomi, "saved me. Not once, but every single day, with her love and strength. Our children, our family, they're my real legacy." The applause that followed wasn't loud, but full of heart. Standing near the cornbread tray, Naomi flushed pink, reaching for his hand beneath the setting sun. Later that night, with the kids asleep, James and Naomi sat on the balcony with 2 cups of chamomile tea. Stars shimmered above the city skyline, and the faint hum of traffic sounded like a lullaby. "I still can't believe we made it here," Naomi said, resting her head on his shoulder. "From that bathroom floor, to cribs, to this." James chuckled, kissing her hair. "I used to stand here, looking down at the city, and feel empty. Now I think about everything." Naomi squeezed his hand. "You allowed yourself to feel, James, and you didn't run away." He looked at her, eyes full of light. "You're everything to me, Naomi." She smiled. "And you're my home." A faint cry rang out from the nursery. Naomi laughed softly. "That's Noah. Your turn." James stood, pulling her gently with him. "Let's go together," he said, and they walked inside, hand in hand, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. In the years that followed, their home remained alive. Little shoes piled at the door. Naomi's lullabies echoed each night, and James, still leading Nexus, spent more time building forts than building empires. Challenges didn't vanish. There were nights Naomi came home exhausted from long shifts, and days James had to stand firm against skeptical board members. But they faced it all, together. One day, a journalist asked James what had changed him the most. He smiled. "A woman once taught me that to love is to live honestly." Hearing it later, Naomi added a new post-it to the fridge. "You are my legacy." Beneath the stars, James and Naomi sat. No need for grand speeches, just presence. Their love, forged through trials, had rewritten their story. From a lonely man and a steadfast woman, to a family, a legacy, and a better world. The final question dissolved. They had found each other, and they had chosen, every single day, to stay.